the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is with us. I know you're incredibly busy, so we really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you. Quick thoughts on things like the fact that we've heard words like imminent and likely regarding an invasion. Where are we this Tuesday morning as far as you're concerned?
Well, it's still the case that an invasion could be imminent, and it is highly likely. What we are doing is pursuing the path of deterrence and diplomacy, urging Vladimir Putin to step back from the brink. He currently has 100,000 troops stationed on the Ukrainian border. We want those troops to be moved. But of course, we are preparing for the worst. That's why we've urged all British citizens to leave Ukraine. And we're doing all we can to support the Ukrainian economy.
We heard Boris Johnson and President Biden, a 40-minute chat yesterday on the phone, talking about a crucial window. What do they mean by that?
Well, we know, or we believe, that Vladimir Putin has not yet made a decision about whether to invade Ukraine. We think it's highly likely. There are huge numbers of troops lined up on the border. We know that they're in a position to attack imminently, but he can still change his mind. And that is why diplomacy is so vital, making it clear to Russia the cost there would be of an invasion. There would be severe sanctions, and we know the Ukrainians would fight back. We've helped train up 20,000 soldiers, we've provided defensive weapons, and the Ukrainians will engage in what will be a long, drawn-out conflict, which will be hugely damaging for Russia and the people of Russia.
How quickly do we think that President Putin could take Kyiv if that's his plan? They're on the northern border there. They're only about 140 miles north of Kyiv.
Well, we think an attack could be imminent. Of course, as I've said, the Ukrainians will fight back. So this could lead to a very protracted conflict, which would be hugely damaging for Russia. But in terms of the timing of an attack, it could be imminent, which is why we're advising all British citizens to leave Ukraine,
I understand
whilst there are still commercial routes open.
I understand that, Foreign Secretary. My question is, how quickly do we think that they could move down to Kyiv if they did indeed invade? Or very quickly. They have troops stationed around Ukraine. Okay. So there could be an attack on Kyiv, there could be an attack from the east. And what we also suspect is there could be a false flag operation, that there could be false claims that they have been provoked, to give a pretext for Russian invasion. And what we have been doing is we've been calling out the Russians. We've been exposing their attempts to put a puppet government into Kyiv. We've been exposing their attempts to create a pretext. But what we do expect over the next few days is there could be an attempt of a false flag operation to create a pretext to claim the Ukrainians are attacking them, so that the Russians have a justification for invading Ukraine. Is there any evidence of that?
There is evidence that is the type of activity they're looking at, and we've seen the Russians do it before. This is absolutely from the Russian playbook, the use of cyber attacks, the attempts to undermine the legitimacy of the Ukrainian government, and the use of false flag operations to justify a pretext for invasion. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking out for over the next day or so.
Russian Defence Minister says that's absolutely nonsense and that many of the military drills have already ended, and it looks as though many of the troops will be moving back from the borders within days. We can't take them at their word?
Well, why have they stationed 100,000 troops on the Ukrainian border in a deliberately threatening fashion? And why is it the case that they have the full supplies and preparations to be able to mount an invasion? They clearly are seeking to threaten Ukraine. They're seeking to bully Ukraine. They've been very clear that they have these demands, such as Ukraine never being able to join NATO, such as moving ahead with the division of parts of Ukraine. So it's very clear that the Russians have some diplomatic aims which are essentially reducing Ukrainian sovereignty and self-determination. That is why they've stationed those troops on the border to seek to threaten NATO and threaten Ukraine. And that's why the only thing I will believe, Kay, is when they move the troops away from the border. Words are easy. What they need to do is move the troops away from the border.
Do we have any evidence that they've been trying to end the crisis?
Well, they started the crisis, first of all. So the only reason we are talking about this today is because of Russian aggression. Everything NATO has done has been defensive, we've been strengthening the eastern flank because of the increased aggression that we have seen from Russia. And we have been talking to Russia. I was in Moscow last week. The Prime Minister has spoken to President Putin. President Biden has spoken to Putin. So, of course, we want a diplomatic solution. But it can't be at the expense of Ukrainian sovereignty. The fact is that in 1994, Russia signed up to the Budapest Memorandum, which agreed that in exchange for giving up its nuclear weapons, Ukraine would have sovereignty and territorial integrity. And Russia are now trying to undermine that.
But not
so
to be
any
members of
diplomatic
NATO.
solution has to respect the sovereignty of Ukraine.
But not to be members of NATO. And as we know, the Ukrainians are very keen to be members of NATO, which is where the impasse stands at the moment.
Ukraine is a sovereign country, and it is a decision for Ukraine and NATO about whether or not Ukraine should be a member of NATO. It's not a decision for Russia. Russia should not have a veto over other countries' security arrangements. And the big risk, of course, if there is an invasion into Ukraine, that will be hugely damaging for Russia and Ukraine, and it will further undermine the stability of Europe. President Putin has actively questioned why other countries in Eastern Europe are members of NATO as well. So this, I fear, would not stop at Ukraine. This is an attack on the neighbouring states of Russia and other East European countries and trying to undermine the legitimacy of them being part of NATO.
But as you know, President Putin's view is that NATO promised that it wouldn't move any further east when we saw the breakup of the Soviet Union.
There was no agreement of that sort, Kay. There is no agreement of that sort. The agreements I've talked about, the Budapest 1994 agreement, the other agreements that were signed as part of the OSCE, the Security Cooperation Agreement, none of them mentioned that countries could not be part of NATO. In fact, those agreements are very explicit that countries should have responsibility for their own security arrangements, and they should be free to make those arrangements, provided they don't undermine other countries' security. And the fact is, Russia's security is not being undermined. Nobody believes that Russia is under attack. The issue here is that Russia is threatening Ukraine by stationing troops on its border.
And you say potentially not stop at Ukraine. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is if we saw an invasion into Ukraine, there would be severe costs in terms of a long-running conflict. We could see the undermining of security more broadly in Europe, and we could also see other aggressors around the world see it as an opportunity to expand their ambitions too. So this is a very dangerous moment for the world. This is, of course, about Ukraine, which is an important sovereign nation, but it's also about the wider stability of Europe, and it's about wider global stability and the message that we give to aggressors. And we have to give the message to Vladimir Putin that there can be no reward for aggression. There can be no reward for lining up troops on somebody else's border and threatening to invade.
Talk about other countries. Which countries were you talking about?
Well, I mean, we're currently in negotiations with Iran over stopping them acquiring a nuclear weapon in Vienna. We've seen China increase its economic coercion and flights over Taiwan. We cannot give a message that aggression gets rewards.
What are we going to do about the British Embassy? The US have temporarily relocated theirs.
We have moved some of our staff to the west of Ukraine, to Lviv, but we retain a presence in Kyiv.
And we're going to continue with that.
We are going to continue, but of course we are constantly looking at the situation in Ukraine, making sure that we are providing a service for British nationals at the same time as making sure our staff are kept safe.
If necessary, how many Ukrainian refugees should we accept?
Well, we're not at that point at the moment. What we are doing is we are working on humanitarian response with partners, with non-government organisations and with other countries. And our priority at the moment is securing the return of British nationals who want to return. There are some British nationals who want to stay in Ukraine. We've made it very clear to them what the risks are, but our priority is securing the return of British nationals.
How difficult is it to negotiate with the Russians? They weren't particularly polite to you when you went last week, Lavrov being incredibly rude, saying it was a conversation between a dumb and a deaf person. It seems like we listen but don't hear. What would you say in response to him?
Well, I made it very clear to Minister Lavrov, and I was also delivering a message to the Russian people, that if there was an invasion into Ukraine, there would be severe cost to Russia. It would result in a long-running conflict, and it would result in very tough sanctions that would hit not just the oligarchs close to Putin, but also major companies in Russia. And of course, Sergei Lavrov didn't like what I had to say, but I was there in Russia to deliver a message to make it clear to the Russian government there wouldn't be rewards for aggression, and they need to move their troops away from the border. And the question that he could not answer, that Sergei Lavrov could not answer, is why there are 100,000 troops on the Russian border with Ukraine if they have no plans to invade.
You very kindly came to see us a couple of weeks ago when you talked about Nord Stream 2. And when you were referring to that, you said that it completely stops if there's an invasion. We cannot favour short-term economic interests over the long-term survival of freedom and democracy in Europe. Are the Germans doing everything that they can as far as Nord Stream?
Well, Chancellor Scholz is travelling to Moscow today. He's having a meeting with Putin. When he was over in the United States, there was a press conference. President Biden made it very clear that Nord Stream 2 would not go ahead. And I hope that is the message he is delivering to Vladimir Putin today, because it is simply unconscionable that that would go ahead in the event of an invasion of Ukraine.
How worried are you sitting here this morning?
I'm very worried about the situation. We could be on the brink of a war in Europe, which would have severe consequences, not just for the people of Russia and Ukraine, but also for the broader security of Europe. There is still time. There is still time for Vladimir Putin to step away from the brink, but there is only a limited amount of time for him to do that.
OK, just another couple of very quick thoughts. The Met Police yesterday confirming in an investigation into death threats made to Keir Starmer following Boris Johnson's comments about Jimmy Savile. This is what Keir Starmer said yesterday. Just want to get your thoughts on this.
The Prime Minister knew what he was doing when he introduced that slur the other day. But this is not about me. You know, there are threats to too many politicians, particularly women, actually.
Should the Prime Minister reconsider and just say sorry?
The Prime Minister did clarify his remarks, and of course, I deeply regret what happened to Keir Starmer. Every politician needs to be able to go about their job through without fear. That's very important. But ultimately, it's the perpetrators who attacked Keir Starmer, who verbally abused Keir Starmer, who we should be putting the blame on.
Yeah. PM darting between Cobra meetings, heading up to Scotland, going to the northwest, the northeast for his levelling up, travelling again to Europe. Is he ever going to have time to fill in this questionnaire for the police?
Well, he is fully cooperating with the police inquiry. But as you've rightly said, Kay, there is a very serious situation at present that we've been discussing with Russia and Ukraine. And the Prime Minister is fully focused on that. He will be chairing a meeting of Cobra later this morning to make sure that we are really pursuing the diplomacy, that we are pulling out all the stops on that, at the same time as preparing for the worst and making sure we are in the best possible position to respond alongside our NATO allies.
I wouldn't want to swap places in your very elegant shoes this morning, Foreign Secretary. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.